So some final words of advice. There are pros and cons of the US News and World Reports, those best rankings. There's a lot of best rankings out there. So the ranking systems can be helpful because there's so many institutions to help you start the research process. I will say, be careful about only looking at institutions that are ranked because a lot of institutions may not even participate in some of the rankings that you're looking at, but may be wonderful institutions. So rankings are not, the US News going to a national database and doing assessments. It's each institution submitting information about themselves. So do keep in mind that there are limitations to rankings. So when you do research, I would say absolutely, I used some of the rankings to start my research process, but in my final decision-making process, rankings really didn't make as much of a difference as everything else that I learned as we had talked about in my research process. So I would just say limits around rankings. Don't get too attached to sort of almost like a false flower of telling you kind of a direction to go in. All institutions will have their strengths and weaknesses. So keep in mind that a very large university is going to be wonderful as it relates to resource opportunities. You will have hundreds of clubs to get involved in. You will have lots of different courses that you can take. You will have an incredible amount of people to know and get to know. It also can feel very big and sort of intimidating at the same time. So knowing yourself and sort of knowing what institution aligns best with your personality, your priorities, and know that every institution is going to have something that is not going to be the best fit for you. And that's okay too, that you will find your way and you will find the best out of it. And that is really what you're looking for. Same thing, that kind of rolls into this. You will make the best of every opportunity as long as you advocate for yourself. So keep in mind that you have a voice, and especially in the United States, the student voice is one of the most powerful voices on campus. We care deeply about making sure we support our students' success. And so make sure that if you need something, you ask for it. And if somebody doesn't get back to you, you ask for it again. Being your own advocate sometimes can be really helpful. And I think I'm just giving you that opportunity and saying, if you have an idea or you have a need, come out and say it and ask for it. Ask alums. Your alumni network at the institution you choose are going to be some of your best advocates as a network to build outside of your discipline or inside your discipline. So always use alums, and they're always excited about helping current students. So, and also follow your different schools on social media. So when I was doing research for my doctoral program, I started following their social media, seeing what they produce, seeing what they put out. What are they talking about? Are they sharing resources? I think it gives you a really good feel for what an institution has when you start to follow them on social media and start to understand what's going on, what are their priorities. And so keep that in mind as well when it comes to social media. That is another kind of indirect way to research.
Thank you so much, Jenna. In that presentation, we have so many good tips, and especially one of the things that can feel the most overwhelming when we are starting this process is, what do we prioritize? How do we choose a program? And Jenna gave us a very good list of questions, first that we need to ask ourselves before starting that search, and then that we need to ask the schools. Being in touch with the schools, it's very important. I imagine that also several of you have a few questions about funding, and I know that many of you are here also because you might be preparing your applications for the Fulbright grant. So you have to know that many of those funding opportunities that Jenna listed are also, they can be used along with a Fulbright grant in many cases. So that's also a very interesting opportunity to keep in mind. Before we jump into the Q&A section, I just wanted to remind you about a few resources, and I'm going to copy these on the chat for you later, but basically to give you a few additional resources that we have available as well. And Jenna, if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen just for a second, just to help them navigate our website. So as I was mentioning before, our academic advising center is within the Fulbright Commission. So I just want to make sure that you also know where to find a lot of this information. We have this section here for estudios de posgrado, titulaciones de posgrado, and then you have a full description of what is the entire process. But if you're finding yourself in this initial step, under step 1, ¿qué opciones tengo?, you have not only a description of several points, how to define your priorities, types of institutions, many of the information that we have heard from Jenna as well. And also this document that I really would like you to take a look at, which is the proceso de búsqueda, which is basically a description of the research for programs process, and not only, as we've been seeing, the different questions to answer yourself, how to find what works best for you. But I also would like you to take a look at this section, if I can get to it, which is, so to speak, okay, I have considered all of these elements. I know what to look for. I know what is important to me. How do I look for it? Like Jenna was saying, and thank you so much for that point, because it's something that we never get tired of repeating. Rankings, while they can be sometimes a starting point, do not limit yourselves to those rankings, because the order of universities in those rankings can be motivated for sometimes for reasons that might not be academic at all, on that might not actually be relevant for the search that you are doing. So do not limit yourself to those rankings, and make sure to use other resources available. Search engines like College Navigator, Princeton Review can be good starting points that are going to allow you to search for specific fields. Something that I am particularly fond of is professional associations. If you are interested in comparative literature, if you are interested in economics, finances, try to find American professional associations for those fields. Sometimes search engines like Princeton Review might list some of them. Try to find these professional associations, and in many occasions, they will actually give you a list of graduate programs within their fields, either because institutions are a member of that association or because they're an accrediting institution and they have a list of accredited programs within that field. Those are great resources to start with. Also, that is for field-specific resources. While the research engines are going to help you to filter by field, then these professional associations lists are going to give you also field-specific resources and lists of programs. And then finally, like Jenna was saying, the key point is to go back to the page of the program in question. Navigate it, find what they're listing about the academic offer, about the faculty, about alumni, get in touch with them, asking your questions. As I was saying, this process, because of the amount of, or because of how vast the academic offer is, can be a little bit overwhelming sometimes. Jenna was describing the search for her doctoral program. In my case, it was very similar. You start just like navigating a lot of different institutions, program, exploring their faculty. I know this professor, I have read their work, I want to work with them. That's also a key point. It's almost like a bottleneck. You start with this huge amount of information, and then little by little you filter it until that you end up with that list that Jenna described of my very top schools, my medium, so to speak. I am a best fit, and the best fit for schools, and then your safety schools, that kind of balance list. So all of this information and more, you can find it here, and of course on Jenna's presentations that, remember, will be available later on YouTube. So I'm gonna go back to our website in case that any of your questions take us back there. But if you want, Jenna, maybe we can start with the questions to see what people is asking. We're going to start with Alexandra. She's asking, is there a last moment when an institution can switch to an online format due to the pandemic circumstances? I don't know, maybe Jenna, from your perspective, it changes by university. But...
Yeah, yes, exactly. And thank you for this question. I think a lot will change by the day. We were expecting to come back to campus, more back to campus, I guess, this spring, and it was decided maybe a week before campus that most classes would be fully online. So I would say that unfortunately, the last moment is probably even during, if you are on campus, there might be a shift to focusing more in online versus hybrid in person. That and our campus did a lot for our in-country international students as it related to ensuring that their visas were maintained and that they could stay in the country, or if they wanted to go home, what did that process look like? So depending on the student will, and also the institution and where the institution is. I know some institutions in Alabama right now are back in person. So it does depend on the state as well as the institution and the location of that institution and what their rates are as it relates to COVID.
Kaveri confirmed that the session is recorded. Thank you, Kaveri. And Irina asked, are graduating assistantships awarded to the applicant before enrolling in the selected program, or do universities offer this to already enrolled students that are studying on campus?
Irina, this is a great question. And it can actually be both depending on the institution. So many graduate assistantships that are the full-time graduate assistantships, there's a process when you are applying to also note that you are interested in a graduate assistantship, or some institutions just automatically assume if you're full-time that you want a graduate assistantship. So again, some institutions do it differently. That's why you should ask them, what is your graduate assistantship process? When do I apply? And do I have to apply? Is it a separate application? So you'll get that information by asking that of the institutions. There are also graduate assistantships, particularly at research institutions and institutions that do a lot of research, that come up throughout the year. So I'll give you an example. Last year, we had a grant that was awarded in November. So we actually then were able to hire or offer a full-time graduate assistantship to a student that was a current student in one of our PhD programs. But we didn't have that money before then. And so it really depends. There are some institutions that they align the money and this is a component to it as well. Always, if you are at the doctoral or master's level, always ask how long the contract for that graduate assistantship is. Sometimes if you have a 4-year program or a 3-year program and they're only supporting your first year, then you want to ask questions. How do I renew that graduate assistantship application? Or how do I extend that? So having that conversation and making sure you also understand how long do I have this and what's that funding look like is going to be important. So great question.
Julia's question, it's a little bit long, but basically she's asking how much research should she do on a specific department for applying for a scholarship? That is, do I need to research institution, to contact the professors, and then how to find field-specific research resources for programs?
So the first component would be, I would narrow down, because if you have a very specific project that you're interested in working on, if I'm reading this right, and there are different scholarships, always apply as long as you have time. And I know that that's saying a lot because we don't all have time, but I would suggest applying to more than what you think you ever will need if you have the time. And then the type of research to conduct within the department, if you should reach out, always reach out. And like I mentioned in the presentation, if you receive an answer back quickly or not quickly, will tell you a lot about the institution as well. and focus on specialty departments. Where can I find those professional associations? Oh, Sandra. Sandra noted, and I think gave a great reference. So you can look at and just do a Google search, but your Education USA advisor can also help you with those as well.
Remember, precisely, you will be seeing on the screen, we have a contact form that you can write to us. Obviously, because no one knows as good as you do, as well as you do, what are your goals? What do you want your program to look like? We cannot do a full search for you because it's very important that you get familiar with what is the academic offer within your field. We are more than happy to provide you with specific resources. I don't know if it's in the field of arts, accrediting institutions that give you a list of programs. As I was saying, many of them are listed sometimes in Princeton Review, when you do a search for a specific field. But like Jenna was saying, a Google search will work wonders sometimes. And of course, you can write to us and we can try to provide you with a specific associations related to your field.
And another benefit of the association, sorry, Sandra, another benefit of the professional associations is sometimes they have scholarships for students, surprisingly. Not always, but those would be a good way to, if they have a student discounted membership fee, to start building your network that way, as well as learning about different funding support opportunities that might be through them.
I think the following question is a little bit related to Fulbright as well. Some of the institutions mentioned the F1 instead of the J1 visa. How are they different? The F1 visa, and this question is from Blanca. The F1 visa, Blanca, basically it's an international student visa. The J1 visa comes in when you are sponsored by a program of the State Department. That would be the case of a Fulbright scholarship. Fulbright grantees are, so to speak, officially invited by the Fulbright program and the Department of State, which means that instead of just going as a regular international student, that would be an F1 visa, in which case you are either paying for your studies yourself or are being sponsored by funding from the university. In this case, you are being sponsored by funding from the US State Department and the Fulbright program. So that is basically the difference. In the case of being a Fulbright grantee, you would go as a J1 student. And in the case of going on your own with the support of the university, you would go as an F1 student. It's also important to keep in mind, in the case of those of you who end up going as a Fulbright grantee, the Fulbright Commission goes along with you in the process of obtaining the visa. So it's not something that you do on your own. But even if you are doing this on your own, which many students do, the Fulbright grant is not the only opportunity that exists. As Jenna was saying, there are many funding opportunities offered by the universities in the US. If you are doing this with university funding, you can also email us if you have questions. Generally, when it comes to visa matters, in many cases, we do prefer to redirect you to the embassy, because at the end of the day, they're the one managing the visas, but we are more than happy to try to help you as far as we can with visa questions. What happens if I'm already in the United States as an au pair, visa J1, and now I want to do my master's degree? In this case, sorry, Jenna, that I'm jumping in.
Yeah, fine, yeah.
We do get a lot of these visa questions. In this case, you would need a different visa, because you would be then starting a graduate program, which is a different type of a stay in the United States, so to speak, than an au pair. So you would need a different visa sponsored by either the university or the grant that you're going with. So the same visa wouldn't be valid, so to speak. Should we have the TOEFL results before apply, or can we apply and send them a month after? In terms
I
of,
can take that if you want. Yeah. Yeah, so I think it depends on the institution, but most of the time institutions will publish what they expect their TOEFL or IELTS scores to be. But they will also, if they have an English language program, they could suggest that if you would like to start the English language program first, and then they will waive the TOEFL if you move through their program. So I would suggest that if you can have the TOEFL results when you're applying and submitting your application, that is preferred, just so that you can understand also, should I be applying directly to the school, or should I be applying to the English language program first, and then switching it into the school program.
And then the famous GRE.
Yes. Okay. So science and engineering graduate programs, how relevant are GRE scores with respect to the undergraduate academic transcripts? This is a great question, Luke. I will say it will depend on the institution. I know that's the worst answer, but a lot of institutions this year with the pandemic have been going away from the GRE for a wide variety of reasons. So I think, from a statistics standpoint, I know very clearly the academic transcript is the best indicator of success in a graduate program. We know that from data. With science and engineering, they likely will be some of the last to drop the GRE, just because that's the culture of that discipline. So I would say ask if there is a waiver for the GRE. If not, then if based on sort of your undergraduate transcripts. But the GRE, is it necessary to also apply? Check with your program, Antonio, before you apply, because a lot of programs have been waiving it this year. I know for most of our programs, we've waived the GRE this year, and likely will not be adding it back in for future years. So we're not the only institution that's doing that. So I definitely would ask before you take the GRE as well.
And I will let you to take the lead for the following ones, since they are GRE as well. For
yes,
later.
oh, of course. For the anonymous question, is it possible to start in the second semester? It will, some programs will have a fall start, have a spring start, have a summer start. And so many of our graduate programs have that opportunity. Some of our programs, though, only start in fall or only start in summer. And so you wouldn't be able to start off cycle because of the way they structure their classes. So it depends on the institution and the program. Many programs that have a very specific semester start have much more prescribed programs. And so that's why they have a very specific start date. How important is the GRE in master's program admission? So that really will depend on the school. I know, at least I can say from our standpoint, the GRE is really not, it's one component of the application, but it's really not seen as much of an indicator as, for instance, your undergraduate program or your master's program if you're applying to a doctoral program, as well as your statement of intent telling us about yourself. Some institutions require your resume or your CV. So we're really looking much more holistically, and a lot more institutions are looking across the board. So if you have a strong GRE, but then maybe you have a mid-range undergraduate or graduate application or program GRE or GPA, then that will then define whether or not they want to admit you. Look, okay, so there is a website, Luke, that I would suggest, and maybe Sandra, you know about it, that I do GPA calculations from one country to another. So we can try to, I guess, send that later. I can look it up as well. Are there standardized entrance?
I think, sorry, Jenna, I think you can also find it list on that Proceso de Búsqueda document that I was showing before. There's the specific link to a GPA calculator that that many of us need to use on a daily basis. So it's a resource that it's out there, and you can find it also on that document that I was mentioning. And I think there was a previous question, Jenna, that we didn't answer from Antonio. Is it necessary to prepare the GRE before applying for graduate programs?
So not necessarily. I think, yeah, not necessarily. And again, Antonio, I would look at the program to make sure it actually is required before you prepare for it and before you take the GRE. Some institutions will not review your application until you have the GRE though. So if you submit your application and you do not have the test scores, you'll be in almost this holding pattern that they can't review you without the full admissions packet. So most institutions, if they require it, they will not review your application until they have it. But again, many institutions are waiving it this year. So I would take a look at that before you submit it.
Lucia was asking if there are standardized exams for graduate school level. That would be the GRE. You also can, depending on the field, you might also have the GMAT for management and business. There's also another one specific for dental school. It depends a little bit of the field, but like Jenna was explaining, the GRE is the most general one requested.
Yes, exactly. And I used to work at a school of business, so we use GMAT, but then we would also accept the GRE. And I think in the chat, that question came up as well. Our GRE is compulsory. It will depend on your program, and it will also depend on your school and whether or not they require it. This year, again, there's been a big shift to removing that from requirements. The collaboration opportunities is, oh, great question from our anonymous attendee. Collaboration opportunities could be internships, absolutely. Internships, especially if you're an F1 visa student, would most likely come under what they call curricular practical training, or CPT, if you have that embedded in your program. Absolutely look for that opportunity, because I think that they are wonderful. Consider and keep in mind that CPT and OPT have a relationship. So depending on how much CPT you use and how you use it could impact your OPT use and time. So just keep that in mind as you do internships with CPT in your program. And collaboration opportunities could also mean, working with a lab in the community and doing volunteering, or working on a project with a nonprofit organization in the community. So thinking about collaboration on campus with different units across campus, or collaboration in the community where you learn more about the community needs. So collaboration can mean so many things, but asking people how do people collaborate across disciplines? How do we collaborate with the community will give you a feel for what their opportunities may be along with internships. So the question about, let me scroll up a little bit here. Julia, great question about the international scholarships and apply for graduate assistantships. Apply to scholarships, apply to graduate assistantships, apply to everything. And then they will let you know if they cannot combine things, because, most of the time you can combine. If one thing covers all of your costs, then they may not also align you a scholarship, because they may use that for another student. So it depends on the institution whether or not they will allow you to have an international scholarship and a graduate assistantship at the same time, but definitely apply to everything and see what you can find.
In the case of the question of the average grade for the Fulbright grant, I will respond this very quickly. You can find it specifically on the application call that is published on the website. For the beca de realización de estudios de máster, that would be a minimum average grade of 7, while in the case of the beca ampliación de estudios, that varies from one year to the other, because it depends on the pool of applicants that we receive. It's not predetermined, so to speak, but it will be around 8 for science and STEM, and around 8.5 for humanities and social sciences. But you can find all of that information in the actual call for applications on our website. And then I don't want to keep you much longer, Jenna, because we are going to hit the hour. So maybe we can just respond to 2 other questions. And then if there are any remaining questions that we were not able to get to, please do either send them to us, or if you have any specific questions for Jenna, I'm sure that you can contact her as well. We are around for any additional questions that didn't get resolved in the session. So maybe the writing sample, Jenna, if you don't mind, that is one of the questions that we do get often.
Yes, absolutely. So Julia, what kind of critical writing sample do most universities expect as requirements and a research paper including works cited list? So Julia, a lot of times I see this different at the master's level than at the doctoral level. And some institutions will have very specific prompts of how they want you to write your critical writing sample or how they want you to submit a sample of writing that includes like a research sample. So I'll speak to doctoral because that's probably where most of these are going to be. I don't see a lot of critical writing samples at the master's level unless you are, again, going into a writing program potentially. So at the doctoral level, the research paper that they usually are looking for is either your master's thesis or a final capstone project that you might have done in your master's. And usually you can submit that whole thing, and that should include your works cited and everything like that. If they're asking for you to research something very specific for your application, that would be a lot of work, and I've not seen that really, but if they are, then yes, absolutely model it in a similar way. Make sure that you know the word count. The critical writing sample, again, will depend on the institution and what types of questions they want you to ask. At the doctoral level, always, always, always include your research interests and always include the faculty that you believe you will align with in your doctoral process. That will help them connect the dots between, I know what I want to research and I know how this research connects to a faculty member and I know how that research then connects with where I want to go in my career. So help people connect the dots between what you're interested in and why, who at that university can uniquely support you and that maybe you can add to their research agenda, and then how then you will move that forward. So I hope that kind of gets at that question, but I'm happy to have conversations on the side as well and help people through their critical writing and their statement of intent all the time.
And the final question from Irina, are there any outside organizations or resources that you could recommend to look for graduate school funding? I'm going to redirect you, Irina, to precisely our website. And of course, Jenna can add any resources that she might consider as well. But we have a full document there that lists how to search for both graduate school funding and external scholarships. So you have descriptions of how to search for them, resources to do so, terminology to keep in mind. So you can check that on our website as well.
Yes, and Sandra, I think that reference will probably be way better than most institutions' websites because Education USA are experts in this. Also utilize the website. So we have a financial aid and scholarships portion on our School of Education website that talks about school-specific types of funding opportunities. So if you are discipline specific, sometimes you can find other information on the websites of the institutions that are sort of your top choice. So using both, but definitely your comprehensive list is likely going to come from your Education USA advisors.
Well, it's past the top of the hour, so I don't want to keep our speaker any longer, but thank you very much to all of you that joined us. I hope that the session was useful. We know that it's a process that it's a little bit difficult to navigate, but I hope that you found at least all of the key points that you need to get started and to move along with it. Thank you to our speaker. Thank you so much, Jenna, for joining us today and for making the time to share with all of us all of these tips and strategies that were really helpful, especially in terms of the language as well, how to familiarize with these different terms. And here we are. If you need us a resource, remember that you can contact us and that the session will also be later available on our YouTube channel. So again, thank you, Jenna. Thank you, everyone who is here today. And feel free to contact us if you need us. Bye, everyone.